Let me tell you something that most doctors won't bring up during a 10-minute appointment. The blood pressure number you've been checking at home, it might be wrong. Not a little off, not close enough, wrong in a way that could lead your doctor to put you on medication you don't actually need. Or worse, miss something that genuinely requires serious attention. Here's the number I want you to sit with for a moment. Research shows that up to 40% of home blood pressure readings contain significant errors, and the overwhelming majority of those errors, they come from simple, correctable mistakes that take less than a minute to fix. I've spent years working in clinical settings, watching patients come in with readings that don't match what we're seeing right in front of us. Some are terrified over numbers that were never accurate to begin with. Others have been falsely reassured by readings that were masking something real going on underneath. In this video, I'm going to walk you through 11 of the most common blood pressure measurement mistakes. Exactly why each one throws your numbers off, and the specific steps you can take to get readings you can actually trust every single time. And at the very end, I'll give you the one calculation that will tell you clearly whether it's time to call your doctor or whether you can genuinely breathe easy. But before we get into the mistakes, let me explain why getting this right matters more than most people realize. Blood pressure isn't just a number on a screen. It's a direct window into the health of your heart, your arteries, your kidneys, and your entire cardiovascular system. When that window is clouded because your technique is off, every single decision that follows, every conversation with your doctor, every medication choice, every moment of reassurance you take home is built on unreliable information. Here's what's actually happening when that cuff inflates on your arm. It squeezes until it briefly stops blood moving through the artery. Then it slowly releases. The point where blood starts flowing again is your systolic. That's the top number. The point where it flows fully and continuously is your diastolic, the bottom number. What the cuff is really measuring is the pressure your arteries are under right now, in this moment, under these exact conditions. If those conditions are wrong, the reading reflects the conditions, not your actual health. And there's something else worth understanding. Insulin resistance, which research suggests affects the vast majority of adults to some degree, quietly drives arterial stiffness, promotes sodium retention, and keeps the nervous system running at a higher level of activation than it should. All of that pushes blood pressure up silently over years, which means inaccurate readings don't just affect whether you're on the right medication. They can hide or exaggerate a deeper process that deserves real attention. Accurate measurement is how you find out whether that process is happening to you. So let's go through the mistakes, fix the technique, and make the data actually useful. Mistake number 1, not resting before you measure. Most people sit down, put on the cuff, and press start immediately. It feels efficient. It isn't. Even light physical activity, walking across the room, coming in from outside, moving from the kitchen to the living room, activates your sympathetic nervous system. Your heart rate rises. Your arterial walls tighten slightly as part of a completely normal adaptive response. And that response doesn't disappear the second you sit down. It fades gradually. Stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol are still circulating. The arterial tone that rose during movement hasn't returned to its resting baseline. Research consistently shows that skipping the pre-measurement rest period inflates your systolic reading by up to 11 points. 11 points. That's enough to move someone from a completely healthy reading into a pre-hypertension range. purely because they didn't sit quietly for 5 minutes first. The fix is simple. Sit in a proper chair, feet flat on the floor, back supported, for at least 5 full minutes before you measure. Breathe slowly. Think about nothing in particular. Let your nervous system genuinely settle. And this connects directly to the next mistake, because what you do during that rest period matters just as much as the rest itself. Mistake number 2, talking. While the cuff is on, imagine someone like James, 67 years old, measuring his blood pressure while half answering a question his wife just called in from the next room. The cuff is on. He's technically sitting still, but he's talking. That's a measurable problem. Even casual conversation during measurement adds approximately 7 points to your systolic reading. The mechanism is the same sympathetic activation we just talked about, triggered this time not by movement, but by the mild cognitive and vocal effort of speaking. Your vocal cords engage. Your breathing muscles activate. Your brain shifts into a state of mild alertness. All of that has a cardiovascular signature, and it shows up directly in your numbers. No talking, no texting, no watching anything stressful on a nearby screen. Sit still, be quiet, then measure. Mistake number 3, caffeine before measuring. For people who aren't regular daily caffeine drinkers, a cup of coffee, strong tea, or an energy drink can push blood pressure up by as much as 10 points within 30 minutes of drinking it. Even regular coffee drinkers, who build up a degree of tolerance, still show a measurable effect in research settings. Caffeine works by blocking adenosine receptors, which normally act as a natural brake on the sympathetic nervous system. When those receptors are blocked, the system runs hotter, and blood pressure reflects that directly. The rule is straightforward. Wait at least 30 minutes after any caffeinated drink before taking a reading. If your morning routine involves coffee first and blood pressure second, you are introducing a consistent source of error into every single morning measurement. Over a week of monitoring, that adds up to a systematically distorted picture of where your true baseline actually sits. Mistake number 4, a full bladder. This one surprises almost everyone the first time they hear it. When your bladder is full, your body activates the sympathetic nervous system, partly in response to the physical pressure and discomfort of retention. It's the same fight or flight pathway, but this time it's being triggered by internal pressure, not stress or exercise. Studies have measured systolic pressure increases of up to 15 points, attributable to a full bladder alone. 15 points from bladder pressure. Go to the bathroom before you sit down to measure. It takes 30 seconds and removes a potential 15-point source of error from your data. It's one of the easiest corrections on this entire list, and one of the most consistently overlooked. Mistake number 5, crossed legs. This is the single largest postural error in home blood pressure monitoring, and the research on it is completely unambiguous. When you cross one leg over the other, you compress the major blood vessels in your lower body, particularly the femoral vein and the vessels behind the knee. Your heart has to generate greater pressure to push blood through those restricted pathways. That increased demand transmits directly into the reading from the cuff on your arm. Blood pressure rises by an average of 15 points in the systolic reading from leg position alone. The problem is this is one of the most automatic, habitual postures for most people. We cross our legs without thinking. We don't even notice we've done it. The cuff inflates while we're sitting exactly the way we always sit, and the reading comes back elevated. And nobody connects the posture to the number. both feet flat on the floor. Every single time. No exceptions if you want readings you can actually trust. Mistake number 6. No back support. When your back isn't supported, your core muscles and spinal muscles engage continuously to hold your torso upright. That's sustained. Low-level muscular contraction creates a physiological load, similar in mechanism to mild physical effort, that elevates blood pressure by up to 10 points. It doesn't feel dramatic, but it's consistent, and it compounds with every other error on this list. People measure sitting on the edge of a bed, on a stool, leaning slightly forward. None of these postures feel like exercise, but your body doesn't distinguish between intentional effort and postural maintenance. If your muscles are working, your cardiovascular system responds. Sit in a chair with a proper back. Rest fully against the support. Shoulders relaxed, not rolled forward. Think of it as deliberately removing every possible source of physical effort from the equation. Before I continue, I want to say something directly to you. None of these mistakes mean you've been careless. None of them mean you haven't been paying attention to your health. These measurement protocols are almost never properly explained. Not at the pharmacy when you buy the monitor, not in most routine consultations, not in the instruction leaflet that comes in the box. The system hands you a device, assumes you know how to use it correctly, and then makes clinical decisions based on the data you generate. You're not broken. You simply haven't been given the full picture. That changes right now. Mistake number 7, wrong arm position. Your arm needs to be at the level of your heart during measurement. Not below it, not above it, at exactly the same height. When your arm hangs below heart level, gravity helps push blood toward the cuff, creating a slightly elevated column of pressure that the device reads as part of your arterial measurement. The result is an artificially high number. For every inch the cuff sits below heart level, you add approximately 2 millimeters of mercury to the reading. A freely hanging arm resting on your knee might sit 4 to 6 inches below heart level, which translates to a meaningful and consistent inflation of your systolic number. When your arm is raised above heart level, the opposite happens. Blood moves away from the cuff and the reading comes back artificially low. Rest your arm on a flat surface, a table, a desk, so the midpoint of the cuff sits roughly level with the center of your chest. That single adjustment eliminates one of the most common geometric sources of error in home monitoring. Mistake number 8. Wrong cuff size. This is one of the most significant and most consistently underestimated sources of error, and it affects a large number of people who measure at home. Standard cuffs are designed for an average adult arm circumference, but arm sizes vary enormously. If your arm is larger than average due to muscle mass, body composition, or larger bone structure, you're at high risk of generating systematically inaccurate readings with a standard cuff. When the cuff is too small, it has to generate greater pressure to compress the artery beneath the larger volume of tissue. The device interprets that extra resistance as higher arterial pressure, producing artificially elevated readings, sometimes by as much as 8 to 10 points, used consistently over time. This creates a false impression that your blood pressure is higher than it truly is. When the cuff is too large, the opposite occurs. It can genuinely underestimate your true pressure, potentially allowing elevated readings to pass completely undetected. Most blood pressure monitors list the appropriate arm circumference range on the packaging. Measure your arm at the midpoint between your shoulder and elbow, with a soft tape measure, arm relaxed at your side. Then match it to the correct cuff size. If you've been using the same monitor for years without ever checking whether the cuff actually fits properly, take that measurement tonight. Mistake number 9. Always measuring the same arm. Blood pressure can differ meaningfully between your left arm and your right arm. For most people, that difference is small. Just a few points, reflecting minor variations in how blood distributes through the arteries supplying each arm. But for a significant number of people, the difference is 5 points or more, and that gap has real clinical relevance. A persistent, significant difference between arms, particularly a gap greater than 10 points, can itself be a clinical signal worth investigating, as it may indicate a narrowing or obstruction in one of the major vessels supplying the arms. Cardiovascular guidelines recommend measuring both arms when you first begin home monitoring, ideally at the same time, with a short interval between readings. After that, consistently use whichever arm produced the higher readings. That arm gives you the more conservative, more clinically cautious data. If you've only ever measured one arm without comparing it to the other, there's a real possibility you've been monitoring the wrong one. Mistake number 10, using a wrist monitor. Wrist monitors are popular. I understand why. They are compact, discreet, and simple to put on. But the anatomical reality creates problems that convenience doesn't solve. The arteries at the wrist are significantly smaller than those in the upper arm. They are more sensitive to the angle of your wrist during measurement because wrist position directly affects whether the artery sits at the correct height relative to your heart, and whether the cuff is aligned properly over the vessel. A wrist monitor requires precise positioning to generate even a roughly accurate reading. The margin for positional error is far smaller than with an upper arm cuff, and most people don't achieve that precision consistently. In clinical accuracy studies, those validated upper arm monitors consistently and substantially outperform wrist devices. The margin isn't small. For the purposes of any medical decision making, wrist readings are generally considered less reliable, and many cardiovascular guidelines explicitly recommend upper arm cuff devices for home monitoring. The accuracy difference justifies the slightly larger device every single time. Mistake number 11, not accounting for white coat effect and masked hypertension. This is where the picture becomes genuinely nuanced and genuinely critical. White coat effect is the well-documented phenomenon where approximately 20% of people experience a significant blood pressure elevation, specifically in clinical environments. The doctor's office, the pharmacy measurement station, anywhere that carries the psychological weight of medical evaluation. The anticipation of a reading, combined with the ambient stress of a clinical setting, activates the sympathetic nervous system. Blood pressure rises, sometimes by 20 or 30 points, in ways that have nothing to do with the person's actual cardiovascular health in daily life. The result can be a real diagnosis of hypertension based on readings that don't represent the patient's true physiological state. Real medication started, sometimes maintained for years, all because the environment of measurement was systematically distorting the data. And then there's the opposite problem, masked hypertension. This is the situation where blood pressure appears completely normal in a doctor's office, but is persistently, genuinely elevated in day-to-day life. The controlled, calm environment of a consultation temporarily normalizes a pressure that is chronically high everywhere else. Masked hypertension is more dangerous than white coat effect in one critical respect. It can remain completely undetected for years. During that time, cumulative cardiovascular and metabolic damage continues unremarked. The arterial walls are under sustained pressure. The kidneys are working against elevated load. The heart muscle is gradually adapting to conditions it shouldn't have to adapt to. None of it visible in the readings taken twice a year in a quiet examination room. This is precisely why consistent home monitoring matters so much. Your kitchen, your living room, your normal morning routine. These are the conditions your cardiovascular system actually operates under every single day. And here the metabolic connection becomes impossible to ignore. Chronic insulin resistance consistently elevates the sympathetic nervous system's baseline activity. It promotes sodium and water retention through direct kidney mechanisms. It drives arterial stiffness by generating low-grade systemic inflammation over time. Inflammation that gradually hardens vessel walls and reduces their capacity to dilate. All of these pathways push resting blood pressure upward persistently in ways that have nothing to do with how much salt you ate this week or how stressed you were this particular morning. Accurate home measurement is how you begin to distinguish between these mechanisms. It's the foundation of any genuinely informed conversation with your doctor about what's actually driving your numbers. So here's what correct looks like. Measure twice in the morning, before food, before caffeine, before any medication. Wait approximately 1 minute between each reading to allow the artery to recover and your nervous system to fully settle again. Record both numbers. Then measure twice in the evening at a consistent time each day, under the same conditions. Do this for 7 consecutive days. At the end of the week, discard the first day's readings entirely. First day values often run slightly elevated as the body responds to the novelty of the routine, and the technique is still becoming automatic. Then calculate the average of all remaining readings across the remaining 6 days. That average is your true home blood pressure. If that average sits above 130/80, that's a meaningful signal worth a conversation with your doctor, not a panic signal, not a crisis. A signal that deserves proper clinical evaluation, taken seriously, followed up appropriately. If your average sits consistently below 130/80, with correct technique applied throughout, that's genuinely reassuring data. The kind of reassurance that's actually grounded in something real and reliable. The difference between that reassurance and unnecessary anxiety, between catching a real problem early and missing it for years, comes down entirely to measurement quality. 11 mistakes, every single one correctable. None of them complicated. Rest for 5 minutes before you begin. No talking, no distractions during the reading. No caffeine in the 30 minutes beforehand. Empty your bladder first. Both feet flat on the floor. Back fully supported against the chair. Arm resting at heart level on a flat surface. Correct cuff size matched to your arm circumference. Measure both arms initially. Then consistently use the higher reading arm. Use a validated upper arm monitor, not a wrist device. And measure at home consistently over 7 days. That's a complete evidence-based protocol. It costs nothing to implement beyond the time it takes to do it correctly. You don't need new equipment. You don't need a different device. You need correct conditions, applied consistently for 7 days. The data you generate with this approach is genuinely clinically useful. It guides real conversations with your doctor. It tracks the actual impact of lifestyle and metabolic changes over time. It tells you whether the changes you're making in what you eat, how you move, how you sleep, are actually moving your cardiovascular numbers in the right direction. It gives you an honest, accurate picture of your cardiovascular health, not a distorted snapshot taken under the wrong conditions at the wrong time. If this was useful to you, please subscribe. It helps me keep making content that's grounded in actual clinical evidence, without the oversimplifications that usually get substituted for real information. Next, I'll be going deep on what your blood pressure readings actually mean once the numbers are accurate, and what the research says about moving them in the right direction. Take care of yourself and measure it right.